Greetings. Today I'm going to be showing you some of the tricks that I use to create questionnaires for social science research. And the way that I do this, I always have in mind clarity and cleanliness, as well as just visual appeal. The reason why is I don't want participants that are distracted by, amongst other things, typos. That's kind of a separate point here, but bunched up together data, things that don't seem to make sense, things that are confusing, things that take too much for them to think about instead of the response they're going to give me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you a few different ways that we can, of course, get data on a questionnaire and how I turn them into, hopefully, more readable and easier to access responses. Now on this I've got a few different ways. On the bottom here I've got open-ended question. I've got a semantic differential right here. I also have two versions of a Likert scale. A couple of different ways that we can do this. And up top I've got a multiple choice scale. So one of the things, of course, we can do when we're looking at this is evaluate, first of all, when we look at this, what do we like about it, what do we not like about it? Well, in terms of this, my own personal preference is I do like that I'm giving pretty simple instructions and asking a pretty simple question here. What is your household income? Please check one. Now, apart from that, this is just an example. We could of course discuss what is your household income should be or could be, but in this case, nice and simple. The responses seem to be pretty accessible in terms of, okay, if I check this thing right here, that means I'm saying I make $0 to $9,999 a year, all right? And I actually should have put yearly household income, for example. But in this case, for formatting, what I don't like is how bunched together they are vertically. Everything seems kind of squished together. And also, I think I might like to offset the responses to make them more apparent that, yes, these are indeed your responses. So first part, okay, well, if I wanted to separate that out, maybe I could just, press enter and give these some kind of line spacing that way. Okay, now they're starting to look too spread out. I don't really like that either. I'm going to back that down. All right, so for the moment, maybe this is okay. Well, I want to move them outside, or I'm sorry, more within the document, because my question starts here, just to offset it so people clearly know that what's below here is how they can respond. A couple ways I can do that. I can, of course, press the space bar. I can use tabs. That can get kind of monotonous and take a lot of time. Maybe I could just select all of them and up here align them to the center. Well, when I do that, I still have them bunched close together in the vertical direction, and now I've got this problem of kind of a haphazard line occurring because it's looking for the number of characters here, dividing it in half and making that exactly where it places it. I don't really like that. Another thing that I can do is if I select all the text, I can go up here to the indenting, the left indent box right here. I can take that and I can drag it. Hey, that's not too bad. Maybe I could do something like that. Now I have to kind of eyeball where the center would be. Suppose I could do it that way. Still have this vertical problem to deal with. Suppose I could press enter and I could change the font, or I could start messing with paragraphs, things like that. Well, that's one way to do it. Another way that we could do it is using tables. And what I'm going to do, because this is going to demonstrate how I'm going to basically do all of these, how I would do all of these, is show you on here how I would convert this into tabular data. Okay. Whoa, wrong way to put it. Sorry. Convert this into a table so I can format it like a table. All right, to start with, for tables, of course, they are made of cells, and cells have rows and columns. So I have to figure out how many rows, how many horizontal spaces I need, and how many columns, how many vertical spaces I need. If I look at this, naturally, I'm kind of drawn to two columns, one here for the response and one here for the information they can respond with. I also see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 selections, so that's going to be 4 rows. All right, so inserting a table requires we go to Insert. And here we see tables just below insert. I go to tables and I see this grid that has a bunch of squares. And what's nice about this is it lets me preview what I'm about to ask it to draw. Okay. In this case, I need 2 columns and I need 4 rows. I'm just going to make a table with that so I have a way to fill this in. And now what I'm going to be needing to do is to insert this information into here. Now normally, of course, you'd be typing it, right? You kind of make your questionnaire and I'm going to have 0, 2, and so on and so forth, right? So this step here is not usual. But I'm just going to go ahead and Another personal preference that I have is, since we tend to read in English, of course, we're reading from left to right. I tend to want them to get the response on the left and then be able to respond on the right. So they're having to process the response before they actually answer it. Otherwise, I'm asking them to take an extra cognitive step, and that is they respond on the left, but they have to read what's on the right. And once they've read on the right, they're going to have to go back to the left to respond. Again, I want to make this truly as simple as possible. So what I'm going to do is just select all this. One of the nice things about Word and tables is if it sees that there are different lines, it will automatically assume each line is a row. So I'm just going to select all 4 and notice it actually automatically put it in there. Now all I got to do is just delete these lines. Well, that's giving you information you don't need there. Okay, that's taken care of. And now on the right, I need a way for them to respond. Now what I prefer is to use boxes, circles, something like that, so they clearly have a target to go after rather than a space like this, because it bounds it better. We know that right next to this response there's a box, and putting something in there is going to mean that I am endorsing this particular response, or this particular response. Sorry, I got distracted by the decimal place right there because these do not have cents, so you want to keep it consistent, right? Okay, to do that, what I like to use, we can find, if we go to Insert and then we go to Symbol and go here, we go, I already got it up, but you can go to More Symbols, and in Wingdings you can find several things that might be of use. Now, of course, I prefer simple. So in this case, I've got a couple options. I've got a box here, I've got just a circle here, and the simpler we make it, the better. Less processing power. This has dimension to it, so that it might actually take more to get into somebody's mind, and it doesn't mean that it takes a whole lot more, but it does. It takes extra effort to register, hey, I've got dimension to deal with here now. So I just used the straightforward simple square. Okay, I just selected it, I hit Insert, now I've got the square. Oops, didn't want to select all of it. And what I'm going to do is just paste squares into all these boxes. Okay, go ahead and get rid of this. All right, this certainly doesn't look much better than what we had before, but there's a few things that tables allow us to do that make things easier. For the first thing is that if we just grab a vertical line without highlighting anything, it treats the whole table as indented. So notice there on the top with the ruler, it actually changes things around for this particular table. I can, of course, always select just one row. Oh, there we go. And that's what this little arrow does, by the way. It selects the entire horizontal space of a cell, and if you keep clicking it, it'll go across each column. I select all that, and I drag. Notice that it will only affect the row that I selected. And I don't want to do that, though. I want to just kind of get these closer together. Right? I can do it this way. Well, actually, you know, there's a faster way. If I select the entire table by clicking on this box with the 4 arrows in it, so that selects the entire table. You know you got the entire table when you see highlights on the outside to the right of the table. What I can do is I right-click anywhere within that highlight, and on these options I go down to Auto-Fit. Auto-Fit right down here. And I get some options. I get Auto-Fit to Contents, to Window, and to Column Width. Well, if I do fixed column width, basically that's going to mean I go to a different menu and say exactly how wide each column gets to be. If I auto-fit to window, what it'll do is go, okay, what's your margins? That's how wide I'll make the entire table. It's kind of the default. It's where we started. The other option I have is I go to auto-fit to contents, and it will make each column only as big as the largest amount of information in any given row that contains the column. Okay? So notice what it did there. Kind of scrunched everything together pretty well. That might be a little close, I think. So I might separate that out a little bit. Okay. Now that I've got it this way, I do want to get it a little bit more visually appealing and easy to mark. There's a couple things that I'm going to do to make this happen. The first part is this vertical thing that's been driving me crazy, in other words, how scrunched together they are vertically. I'm taking care of that issue. To do that, I'm going to select the entire table, and then from here I'm going to right-click. Now down here I've got Table Properties. Click on Table Properties, it gives me a whole bunch of options for aligning and justifying and making rows a certain width, columns a certain width, so on and so forth. I can change cell aspects. I can also change some alternative text. So essentially, This is where we can describe what's actually in the tables. For us, very simple. I just want to change how high each row is. Right now you can see its default is basically unspecified. It's program oriented, so single space, double space, so on and so forth. What I want to do is I'm going to specify the height. If I hit at least, it's going to make sure it's at least a certain height. If I hit exactly, it's going to make sure it can only be that height. So I'm going to show you what happens if we use exactly. Make this 1/10 of an inch, hit exactly, hit OK, and bam, everything gets nice and scrunched together. That's basically what I told it to do. In this case, that's not what I want. This does have applications, but for what we're doing here, we don't need it. Instead of it being exactly, I want to go to at least, and I'm going to specify the height bigger than this. Okay. In this case, I tend to like 0.3 inches. 0.3 inches at 12-point font. Okay, at least. So when I hit at least, it's going to make sure each one of these rows is absolutely at least 0.3 inches, 3/10 of an inch. And actually, while I'm here, I don't think I did this. I'm going to change everything to 12. I'm just going to keep it in Calibri. Just regular Calibri. Make that 12. Okay. It's a little bit bigger. When it's printed out, it's easier to read. Of course, the font that you use, there's, people argue back and forth whether serif or sans serif is good. I stick to really Calibri, Times New Roman, Arial, very basic. The more basic you can make it, the easier it is to read, and the easier it is to read, the less power they have to the participants have to use to understand what you're trying to say. I'm just going to stick to Calibri here. Alright, so now I've got some vertical space here, but it still doesn't seem right. The alignment's off in each one of these things. Well, for tables, under Table Tools up here and Layout, we have an alignment part that is specific to tables, which is helpful. So these 9 boxes represent all the orientations we can have. In this case, it is vertically left and horizontally up. Wait, vertically up and horizontally left, sorry. And that we can see here, right? It's up and to the left. What I like to do is to keep everything vertically in the center of each row. Okay. And in the case of things that are all the way to the left, I like to keep them all the way to the left. So I'm going to select this option, Align Center Left. So it's going to center the text vertically, but align it to the left side of the cell. I click that and notice it moves everything to the center. Okay. Now in terms of these guys, I don't really need a left or a right so much, but I need it to be smack dab in the center of all this so it lines up nice visually this way. I'm just going to put center, center here, Align Center. Okay. Alright, now we've got that. I don't really like this box right here underneath what is your household income. Like I was saying before, I prefer it to be to the center. Well, when we want to get the whole table to the center, we can actually go under our normal home properties and normal alignments and paragraph and use the options that we typically have to move the whole thing into an alignment of our choosing. In this case, I'm just going to center it. Okay. Now that I have it this way, the next part is, now my own preference is I don't like these boxes, and I'll show you why. When I print it, this is okay, but it still seems awfully busy. It seems like these boxes aren't helping with the information. They're harming it because there's a lot there, a lot of different boundaries. I do want boundaries. I don't want them that strong, I guess is another way to put it. So what I can do is select this entire thing. I'm going to go back to the design tools for table tools, and here you notice we've got borders all the way on the right here. This is a place where we can specify what kind of borders we want. And you notice as I mouse over each one of these options, it will give me a preview of what each will look like. Okay. What I do is I always start with a clean slate, no borders. So when I hit no borders and I show a print preview here, you notice now we have no lines. This might be good enough for you. Some of this is personal taste as well. Now in my experience, and the experience that I'm speaking of here comes basically from multiple questionnaires that I've created over the years and lots of piloting of them. So by piloting, basically, that means I'm giving them to participants, and I'm asking the participants what they liked about the questionnaire, what was, if there was any formatting they didn't like, if questions were unclear, so on and so forth. And the set of, I guess, formatting principles I'm showing you here are based on what the participants have told me over time. Okay. Now, one of the things they do tend to like is when I separate out each row connected to an option by using a shading in the background. So if we wanted to shade each cell in the background, what we do is, of course, highlight all the cells we want to shade, and then we go to design, and notice here on the right we've got shading. Okay. If I click down on this, it gives me a whole bunch of different colors. And what's nice about 2013 is that I mouse over them and it gives me a preview. In this case, always simple is better. I want it to be subtle. I don't want it to be distracting. So of course, if I made it bright orange, that might be a little distracting, and that certainly would bias, I would guess, certainly would bias people's responses. That is an argument against doing this, actually, is that if you make the background different colors, they may respond differently to them for reasons beyond control. In this case, I haven't really experienced any issues with that. So that's why I'm suggesting it here. So what I did is when I selected this, I went to the shading. I selected, in this case, very light gray, 5% darker than the white background. It automatically filled in all the space behind these options. Now if I hit Control Print and I zoom in, you can see there's a distinct difference between this option to this option. Visually, it makes it easy to know that 0 to 9,999 is attached to this box. So, okay, what is my household income? Please check 1. Okay, this is a box. It's an empty space. I want to fill it. It looks like a target. And this is how much I make. So, check mark. Okay, that's kind of the idea behind all of it. And I would just apply that shading to every other row. Rather than having to go back here and select the color every time, by the way, on 2013, it automatically remembers the last shading that you use. So I'm just going to click on this paint bucket. Automatically will fill the background. See there? Which is kind of nice. Okay. So now if we take a look, I zoom in, you can see distinctly the differences between each one. Okay. Another thing that I like to do typically is to let people know what the boundaries of their responses would be. So visually it says everything in this box or within this range is something you can choose. One of the ways you can do that is by using border lines. This is a good way to introduce border lines here. If I go to the Design tab again and back to Borders, remember we had all these different options that we can use. One of them in this case is the top border. It'll insert a line over the top of everything. And if I wanted to bound that, maybe I could go to Border Styles here again. Oops, not Border Styles, sorry, but Borders, and put a bottom border in. Now I've got kind of a cap for all this data, or response, I should say. Right, I zoom in, and you can see. Now we've got a distinct, beginning place, this data that you can respond, or that you can use to respond, and end place. Okay. Another thing that you can do actually is if you really want to get it boundaried is you can use the same principles to boundary the whole question. In this case, in the Home tab, we've got under Paragraph another place where we can put borders. Okay? In this case, I can put maybe a bottom border right there, and I can go down here and I put another bottom border and see now what we got is a full boundary. Now, in a lot of circumstances, that might be too busy. If you've got a really complex questionnaire, however, this can come in very handy. All right. So those are just a bunch of different options that a person could use. Now, for something this small, I probably would not add more lines to it. It just clutters it up. So I'm just going to reverse some of this. Okay. Borders, no border. Right. And this is the art part. It's kind of looking at it and going, that looks good. I can see what I'd be asking here, right? If you don't necessarily like it all the way in the center, you might move it over here. But in this case, something like this, yeah, I could see using that. I mean, even without the shading, since there's not that many categories of response they can have, just making them all white might just, in terms of background shading, might be just fine too. But the big difference here is, again, it's trying to make it clear and clean. Okay. This same thing can be applied to all sorts of different scales. For example, down here I've got this Likert scale, and we can use tables to change this around as well. For example, we can keep it the same format that we have here. I want to get rid of that. There we go. I wanted to get rid of that tab justification that I had right there. We can use the same kind of format right here. In this case, I don't really like it, just for whatever, it just doesn't feel right. I don't know, it just doesn't feel right for me. Also, I'm asking people to circle, but there's not much vertical distance there, which means again I'd have to go into the, okay, let's try pressing enter. Oh man, that means that to separate one from the other, I'm gonna have to keep, that's gonna be a lot of white space, too much white space, right? Or I can try messing with maybe this up here, right? One. I need less than one. Let's 0.5. That's not much of a difference. So it gets complicated quickly. This isn't a problem if we use tables. So if I wanted to keep this format, I might use this table data here, and let's see, what do I got? I want to have one statement on top, but I also need space for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 responses. There's a trick to this part. All right, so I know I've got one row that's going to be a sentence, and below that is going to be something with 5 spaces. One of the ways that I could do this, I suppose, is I could just make it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 responses here, and then just have my typed statement, and then my degree of agreement down here. Oop, that didn't work that way. Okay, it's not gonna be. I guess I'll just type this in real quick. By the way, I'm doing this beginning to end without much in the way of a script, and I'm pretty much doing it on the fly, so I apologize for hemming and hawing and anything else that might come up that way. But we do what we can. All right, so maybe I fill it in that way, and I'm going to go ahead and let's try auto-fitting to contents. Okay, so that really bunches things together. I'm not too much of a fan of that. Let's see here. I could perhaps change the inches of this. Right? Actually, no, I'm not going to do it that way. I think instead, rather than fussing with it this way, what I'll do is expand this out a little bit. And there's a whole, there's a variety of different ways I could do the fixed column width and all that kind of thing. But usually I just kind of eyeball it. And what I can use is distribute columns evenly. And it will automatically kind of tell me where I'm at in terms of how much room I need to get them close together. But it might not necessarily be completely on. Okay, looks like I'm getting closer there. Yeah. Okay, that seems a little bit crunched together. Let's try something like, maybe something like that. To be honest, I don't really like this format, and I don't really like putting never, rarely, sometimes, frequently, always. It's a lot, and it's a lot of reading. I don't typically like to do it that way as a result. But now that I have it this way, I'm going to go ahead and take my statement, copy it, and paste it up top. I'm going to go ahead and just put that all the way on the left. I don't know, give it a number or something. 1. Okay. And now the issue that I have is space up here. Let's get rid of that. And certainly I want this to be reflected as being a part of this statement, right? So I'm going to go ahead and take all these and center them. Okay, that's not too bad. And now my issue is how close each one of these is vertically to the statement. So I can use the table of properties. I can go into row. Oops, I did not want to do that. Thank you. And specify the height. Let's see. Let's try it at 3 and see what happens. Okay, that might be enough. I'm also going to align everything probably just smack dab in the center. Okay, and let's go ahead and get rid of, yeah, let's go ahead and get rid of all the borders. Okay. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so that gave me a little bit more space. I might want more. I'm not sure. But I probably wouldn't use this format to begin with. It gets really, really garbled no matter which way you do it. But you can see here I can make it a little bit more clean compared to what we had down here. In terms of the spacing of these, of course you can change that up as you'd like. But the idea is here I want enough room for them to circle the response. Now let me show you a way that I do like to actually apply Likert scales. It can be a pretty handy way to do things and a pretty handy way to get the point across to the participants. So for this, I prefer having these kind of questionnaires when they're set up this way, laid out in terms of landscape and not portrait orientation. So I'm just going to start a new document, put it in landscape, and I'm going to go back to the other document here and grab our responses. Okay. Just paste them in for the moment. Okay, so there's my raw questionnaire data, so to speak. Now, the way I had this option set up, you notice we've got these instructions here that tell you what each one of these numbers represents. Well, this is a lot to read, and it gets confusing, and there's a lot of quotation marks, and that's too much. There's too much. One of the reasons why I like to use the format I'm about to show you is because it kind of gives instructions without giving instructions. Now, of course, I would recommend truly giving instructions as well, but not in this format, right? You could just say circle the number that corresponds, or the number that best represents your level of agreement. You could probably just stop there. Okay, so to make that happen, first things first, I got to figure out how many rows and columns that I need. So I make this a matrix rather than it being a statement then responses, then a statement then responses, down and down and down in a ratcheting fashion. So I need to figure out how many rows and columns I need. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different statements, so that's going to be 5 rows. And I've got a statement, that's 1 row, and then numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for a total of 6 rows. So 5 rows, 6 columns. Okay. Now, let's see if this will be kind to me. It was not kind. All right. Well, oops. Just go ahead and get rid of the numbers. I know what they are already. So they're 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Hopefully I can remember that. If not, then I shouldn't be doing this video, I guess. All right, so let's get my statements in there first. Put them all in here. Okay, there we go. Got my statements. Next, I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so it's looking pretty haggard right now. Pretty rough. I'm just going to move that all the way down. The basic concept I have here is, again, I've got on the left the statement, and on the right, I've got all the ways someone can respond. Okay? Now, I'm actually going to need one more row above this entire thing. If I want to insert a row, I select whatever row I want to use as orientation relative to my new row. I select that. I right-click, and I've got an option here called Insert. Insert, I can insert columns, rows, cells, you name it. In this case, I just want to insert 1 row above. So insert rows above, that's what I want. There's my 1 row. Awesome. Okay. Now, each one of these represents a statement, a response statement. So the response statements that we have to work with, circle 1 if you strongly disagree, 2 if you disagree, so on and so forth. And up here is where I actually represent that. So we got strongly agree. And if you can hear the typing, I apologize. I got a loud keyboard. And what did I say? It was uncertain. No opinion or uncertain. Okay, let's do it this way. No opinion / uncertain. And then we've got disagree and strongly disagree. Okay. So we've got our matrix, and essentially what we're saying is, for this particular statement, circle whatever number corresponds to how you feel about that. Teacher tenure should be discontinued for public school teachers. If you strongly agree, then you'd circle the 1. If you have no opinion, you'd circle the 3, right? Now we just need to make it clean, make it look a little bit nicer. So to do that, we're going to orient each cell based on the information we're asking it to contain. So first thing I'm going to try is I'll select all that. I get on here to autofit, or I'm sorry, not autofit, but yeah, actually autofit to contents, and see what happens. Okay, much better. Much, much, much better. Okay. In this case, I've got these things spread all over the place. That's a little strong. So I think what I'm going to do here is let's distribute the columns evenly. Okay. And this is the largest category I have. There's something to be said for keeping each interval between the cells the same space so that the eye knows exactly where to look for a given response. Now, we're not there yet, but I did get each one of these essentially in the same space when I aligned them. Okay, so now I have it set up this way. Notice here that it breaks down here automatically. It continues the sentence down on the bottom, and that's going to be a good thing for us when we go to finish up the alignment. So let's go ahead and finish up the alignment. First thing I want to do is work on the alignment of each cell. So my first step here is I'm going to select all of my leftmost my leftmost statements, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure they are centered within the row vertically, and make them to the left horizontally, just to make sure that's working that way. Now on the top here, you tend to want to have your categories as far down on the bottom toward the line as possible. Any space can get confusing. In this case, I want them all centered, and I want them as close to the bottom as possible, like so. Okay? And for these, I want them in the center to represent each of these particular responses, but I also, I want them horizontally centered, but I also want them vertically centered so that they correspond with each one of these statements. And when I do that, when I've got lots of statement here, it actually makes the eye understand that this is one sentence compared to this one. It helps with that. So I'm going to center the whole thing like so. Okay. Now that I have that, the last thing I want to do is work my vertical spacing. So I'm going to select the whole thing, go to Table Properties, and I'm going to specify the height. Let's see what 0.3 does. That's not too bad. All right. Now the next step is I got to work with my borders. So let's first step for me in this case, I'm going to get rid of all the borders. So I have a blank canvas to work on. Okay. Now for me, one of the things I immediately see is it probably, because I've got quite a bit of data and it is moving across the page pretty horizontally, I'm gonna help people out by shading every other statement and collection of responses. So now my eye clearly knows that this is one statement and each one of these numbers belongs to the statement. Okay. And one of the ways that you can kind of do this quickly is, rather than just dragging across each row, hold down Control, select the data, not all of it, sorry, right? Select it, drag it, while still holding down Control, release the left mouse button, select your next amount of data, and that will allow you to select information, highlight information, without having to go through the entire field to get to it. Right? In other words, I don't have to highlight this to get these two highlighted. Once I have that, I can let go of Control. I go back to Design under Table Tools. I hit Shading, and voila. There we go. Now, there's other ways you can set it up. If you got a whole bunch of different data, you can say that, okay, every other one of these, we're going to do a border shading. That's a little complex for us, and we don't need to get into that, I think. Now, when we got response categories on the top, we kind of need to treat it like a table, which means we have to have a line demarcating where the information begins and ends. Easiest way to do that, I just select the topmost row, and in Home, the Home tab, under Paragraph, I go back to this border line right here, and it's already on the bottom border, and that's what I use. Click Bottom Border. I also tell it where the data stops. Tell the reader where the data stops, the participant. And I just do the same thing. Select the bottommost one and hit bottom border. Get rid of that. Okay. And if I print that, right? Go ahead and take a look. See, it's a complex collection of participant information to get through, but it's very easy to learn what we're looking for here if we do it this way. Now, I would probably try to avoid, if I've got 4 single sentences here and one that's breaking across, I'd probably do my best to make sure that wouldn't happen. So I'd try a few different things. I mean, if 12's a little too big, then there's nothing wrong with going down to 11. I would recommend not getting any less than 9 for sure, and not really much more than 12. Right? If I do it that way, I do have some room to move around here. So let me see what we can accomplish doing that. Maybe if I do something like that, and then let's go here, right click and distribute the columns evenly. All right, yeah, that works great. I made it 11 instead of 12. All fits on one page, and we can clearly see. All right. Strongly disagree, agree, circle the response. Okay. So that's one of my bigger tricks. I really like using it, borders and shading and things to get complex Likert scales across. You can actually get Likert style or Likert type scales, or at least numbered scales, ranked scales, in the same format. For example, if you wanted to do a frequency scale where we're having numbers represent, once in, or never, or once in my life, a few times in my life, once a year, twice a year, you can actually make this go all the way across the page and still make it work. It's a pretty fancy way to get complex information out there. Now back on the rest of our protocol here, now that I've shown you that, the rest of it hopefully can be a little bit more explanatory, right? You can see kind of where I would go with this. So again, I'm looking at, all right, this data is not too bad, but the problem I have here is I can't get this to line up just right. See how it's just a little bit to the right here on the bottom, and if I take it back when it's a little bit to the left, and I have to mess with margins, I have to mess with tabs. What a nightmare. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to use tabs. In this case, I've got 2 rows of these semantic differential. Insert, table, 2 rows. And I've got basically 3 different discrete pieces of information to include. So I'm going to have 3 columns. Okay. My area for entering the information is the first one, and it's going to be in the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and insert that there. I'm going to put another one in here, because I know that's going to be the same. And now I need to have start attractive. I'm just going to copy and paste this stuff in. And unattractive. Oh, come on, you can do it. Ooh. Oh, that. I don't. Computer went crazy. Okay. All right, now I have it in this format. I can mess around a little bit with the distance between everything, and again, I can use this autofit to make my life a little easier. Autofit to contents, boom, it brings everything in. The largest amount of information is going to be what it uses to figure out how wide the columns should be. And in this case, we do want them kind of close to each other. Now, this semantic differentials are one of the occasions where I think that justifying the leftmost data as far right as possible, aligning the leftmost data as far right as possible is a good idea, so that we know clearly this is the boundary, right? Attractive is the 100% and unattractive is the 0% or vice versa. To do that, I'm just going to select all the data, all the information on the left. I'm going to go to my layout, and I'm going to go again centered vertically, but aligned all the way to the right this time. Okay, see how that moves it all the way to the right? Now we have kind of an absolute understanding that this line is somewhere between attractive and unattractive, and it's my job to figure out where it might be. Okay, if I have it over this way, that might actually mess with somebody's ability to figure out the semantic differential. And also, I think it just looks nicer. Okay, so now that I've got that, I'm going to do my usual kind of routine. I don't like how high it is, each row, so I'm going to adjust that a little bit. Okay, now that I did that, I've noticed I need to fix the alignment on the rest of this, so I will do that. In this case, I want it to be all the way to the left and centered vertically, and these I want to be centered in every way, shape, and form. Okay, all right, and there we have it. Oh, the last thing, I definitely do not like the borders. Let's get rid of those. Okay, now let's do a little side-by-side comparison here. Okay, subtle difference, but it definitely looks polished. It definitely looks like whoever wrote this knows what they're doing, and believe it or not, that can make a big difference in a questionnaire. If it's sloppy, if there's typos, you lose essentially the authority, and they kind of don't pay attention to that anymore. Instead, they start having fun finding other flaws in your questionnaire. We want to avoid that. Good spacing. I clearly have room. I can tell where everything is aligned. If I had a whole bunch of these, I might consider doing that shading in the background. In this case, I'm not going to. Now, the last thing that I have here is the open-ended question segment. And in this case, one of the things we have to think about is, all right, people have variable sized handwriting, so I want to make sure this is, big enough, but not massive. Every time I'm pressing enter here, it's inserting a whole bunch of spaces. Let's try it down here. Yeah, so okay, that's going to be a pain in my butt. All right, maybe if I change the line spacing of the paragraph. Okay, maybe yeah, I could do it that way. Okay, that's not too bad. All right. But now I have to sit here and hold shift down and press down my hyphen key so I can get the underscore, and that's all well and good. So that's the way most of the time it comes to bear. But you can make this process, whoa, what happened there? You got me. You can make this process a lot easier just by using a table. I'm going to insert a table, and it's going to be a 1-by-1 table. Okay. And oh, I messed with the spacing in here. I want it to go back to 1. Okay. So I have a blank canvas to work with. Now each one of these tables cells can be used as a line, as we have here. To do that, all I got to do is select the whole thing, and it's a border trick again. In this case, I'm going to start with the clean palette there, nothing there. And what I want is a bottom border. Okay. All right, so I've got my bottom border there. And now let's say I just want more lines. To do that, click outside of the table all the way on the right. And you notice the cursor goes outside the table all the way on the right. You do that, you press enter, it'll automatically make another table. Okay. Now, when I did that, you notice, hey, the line moved down with it. Well, that's because what Word does to figure out where a border is drawn is it looks for the bottommost, the topmost, or those that are in the middle. In order to make this work, I'm going to have to let Word know that I also want the middle lines to have borders. So I'm going to do that. In this case, we got the bottom border already, but I also need the inside horizontal border. Click that, and notice now I've got 2 lines. Now if I go to the outside and I press enter, you notice it will just keep drawing lines. Okay. Also, I can get really fine control over exactly how tall I want the spacing for each one of these by doing my usual specify height method. Let's make it another 0.3. Why not? What does that do? Hey, that's not bad. Okay. Now when I print, there's a couple things that change for me. Okay. Notice first, it's a much finer quality line. And there's something I'm going to show you in a second, because you can alter this like crazy. You can't alter the underscore. Well, you probably can, but it's going to take a whole lot of work and maybe programming a true type font. And who wants to do that? What I can do with this, however, is I select the whole thing. I can really start playing with the borders. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to go back to my design, and in borders, instead of using what we have here already, I'm going to go down to borders and shading. And this opens a whole bunch of options that we can use. We can get really kind of crazy with all these things. First thing is we got settings, so that can erase all the borders. We got a box, it'll draw a box around whatever we have selected. We want all of them. It'll make a grid depending on horizontal columns, or we can make a custom border. In this case, I like to use the style color, this center column to make sure I've got the right style that I want. Let's say I want a solid line. And then I like to use this interface right here to let Word know exactly what it is I'm looking for. In this case, I have it applied to the table, but we can also choose the cell, which would mean each individual cell. We can choose paragraph, and there's a trick that we use in paragraph I'll show you in a second. We can use the individual strings of text that we have. In this case, I want the whole table to have an inside border and a bottom border. Okay, and let's say I wanted to have this kind of fun. Hey, this one looks fun. I want it to have that kind of lines. Okay, so I'm just going to replace these. You do have to refresh it once you select a different line form. And notice now I've got all those kind of crazy little lines right there. Okay, I still like that kind of form. Now, the thing that's good to know as well is, let's say you weren't exactly thrilled about the thickness of the line, also known the weight, right? What we can do is go to the width here, and we can adjust the line density and the line density to whatever we'd like. The width is what they're calling it here. Okay. In this case, I like them pretty thin, so I'm going to keep it at half a point. But I've got all sorts of control over it in this way. You can also access a whole page border around each portion of the document. You can also shade everything, right? So I could start applying all sorts of fun shading if I wanted to. And by the way, this is one of the ways that you can get the every other highlight going on too. In this case, I like them this way. Now, one of the things that it lets us do, and I'm going to align this because it's just going to look nicer that way when I align everything to the bottom and the left. Okay. If we had an electronic version of this, is actually very fancy for forms too, because if we just use this underscore thing, then we start typing, notice it pushes everything away. And I have this underlined already because I wanted to show you Thick line, thin line. Does not look good at all. Okay, so that's a pain in the butt. If you've had to fill out an electronic form or something in a Word document that way, it's frustrating. In this case, I can type all day long and it doesn't move the form. Now the one thing I am going to warn you against is once I get to the end, notice it's going to keep going. Okay. If you're doing something like that, this is actually, there's better software out there to get it to work. But the one thing that actually makes this format of things nice is the last trick I'm going to show you, and that's for signature, date, number, printed name, anything like that. This is a nice, easy way to make forms that look really kind of professional. To do that, I'm going to use tables. Again, surprise, surprise. And why aren't you letting me insert a table? Table. Insert table. Huh. I wonder why it's doing that. Should let me. Let's delete some stuff and see. Back some stuff out. Okay. I think something's going on with this particular page. I may have done something weird. Alright, rather than try to spend time figuring out what happened there, someone else can tell me. If you know, please tell me. I'm just going to insert another table here, and let's say I want to make a signature portion of a document. To do that, I need 2 rows for each individual item. Okay, and in this case, let's say I want signature on the left and date on the right. So I make a 2x2 table. On the bottom, I want a signature, and I want a date on the bottom right. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the lines above signature and the line above date. Now, what I've showed you thus far, basically, you might be thinking, okay, that's a piece of cake. All you do is get rid of the borders, then you select this part. You can just put a bottom border from what we highlighted, and there you go. There's a signature and the date. Now, if I print it out, it doesn't look all that great. It's one big line, and that's about it, right? Yeah, that doesn't look so good. Well, one of the things that we can do, which is kind of nice, is rather than use this style of border, we can use a style of border that's located within our borders and shading options. Rather than applying this to the cell, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. First of all, we're going to apply it to the paragraph, and you'll see what happens when we do that. Okay. Oops, I didn't get rid of the bottom border. There we go. Okay. Now when we do that, we've got clear demarcations between the signature and the date, which gives it a nice, clean, professional look. It's also not visually cluttering, and you notice we've got definite space here. Okay. The other thing to notice is that this line actually hovers above the natural border of the cell. Okay. So we got a nice place where we can have a signature and a date. Now, let's say we didn't want the date to be that large. Well, the nice thing is, rather than having to mess with underlining or anything like that, I move this around, it's going to resize it automatically. Okay. Now, when I'm doing this, I usually actually have a center column if I'm doing a left and a right like this. And to do that, I'm just going to insert a column. So I'm going to select a whole column. I'm going to right-click. I'm going to insert columns to the right of that data. And bam, new column right there. Okay. Let's say I want that to be about like that. Now all I got to do is get rid of that middle paragraph border, and it will create for me some automatic space. In this case, you got to go back to here, to paragraph, and sometimes you have to turn it on and then turn it off. Oops, and it should be the center. And that gets rid of it. Now if we look at it, I got a pretty clean looking signature and date line. Right? So it's a good option. You could do all sorts of things with the tables in here, and it really is a good option to make things clean, especially when it comes to questionnaires. Some other things that you can do, the last thing I want to show you is if you've got a very large complex data set, you may want to include codebook information next to responses or sections. And one of the things I recommend is whatever the codebook might be, or data might be, what you want to do is you can keep it nice and small, right, by selecting the data that is part of the code. And what you can do is, where am I going? What I want here is you can superscript it like that. That's one way you can do it. You can, of course, just do the good old that, and I want it to be tiny. I want it to be like, oops, sorry, 6. Okay. Basically doing a superscript this way. One of the things I recommend is to change its color so it doesn't stand out like crazy. In this case, it's already set to black. I want it to be, I don't want it to be invisible, but I want it to be nearly invisible. Maybe something like that. Right? This is another thing that you can do that actually does assist. If you've got complex questionnaires, it can assist you with still having that information that's important for data entry and coding without being too distracting to the participant. All right, I hope I covered everything that well, I think I covered everything that I could cover, but please feel free to leave some comments. Questions, comments, concerns, suggestions. Again, my whole point on this was to show you how you can use tables to create questionnaires. Of course, there's a whole bunch of other things to keep in mind. Of course, we got to think about response validity. We have to avoid leading, double-barreled, biased questions, and so on and so forth. We got to make sure that for our response choices, we're collectively exhaustive and mutually exclusive. And I'm kind of assuming you already know all these things. This can be a powerful way of doing things and a very fast way of doing things once you get the hang of it and the hang of using tables. And of course, using tables is applied to much more than questionnaires. It just tends to be one of those things that's kind of overlooked in Microsoft Word when it comes to formatting. I am aware that there are many forms where tables are integral and they're very, very professional looking. All right, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.